Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hello, my sensitive friend, and welcome to episode 127, where we are going to talk about the Relationship Rulebook, or how to get rid of the most disempowering love and happiness stealing approach to having a great relationship. But I think the Relationship Rulebook is a little bit more succinct. So this is a big topic. I could teach a whole course on this. But for now, my goal is to get you some of the basic concepts and tools to start making this very problematic, but totally common and normal obstacle to great love a thing of the past. Of course, when you become a client in my program, we go into much more depth and we work uniquely with your own challenges around this with a very detailed workbook and personalized coaching. But let's get you some movement on this right now, today. So one of the littlest things that leads to the biggest problems in marriage is what I call a relationship rule. It's really an idea or an expectation that you have in your head about what marriage is supposed to look like, what's normal, what's kind and acceptable behavior from your partner in their interactions with you, and sometimes even how you yourself are supposed to be and interact as a wife. Most of us have a collection of these rules, these ideas, these expectations, and it's often a large collection. So I call this your relationship rulebook. And our relationship rulebooks make us miserable if what we want is a relationship that's based on love and full of connection versus one that's lifeless and duty-based, or more like a business arrangement, or full of conflict and drama. So do you ever feel frustrated with your partner? I'm laughing because most of you listening do. Do you ever feel disappointed? Do you ever feel mad? Do you ever feel unable to love your partner? Does it seem like he keeps doing things wrong here and there or all the time? Right? If so, it's because you have a relationship rulebook. Almost every one of our hard emotions when it comes to our partner has to do with our rules, our relationship rules. Again, our ideas about who or how our partner should be or what they're supposed to be doing as your partner. And if you're like most humans, you may think that it's your partner's fault that you feel these hard emotions, right? The disappointment, the frustration, the anger, the resentment, the hurt. Right? Because he's not showing up how some part of you at least thinks he's supposed to as your partner. But I want you to remember, you'll remember if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, if you're new to the podcast, this might come a little bit like shocking, it might be a shocker. But remember, your feelings come from your thoughts and beliefs, not from someone else's actions or behaviors. Right? They come through that thing that I've called the filter that we perceive things through. We're never just perceiving reality. We're always filtering our perceptions through our biases, our past experiences, our beliefs, our preconditioned ideas, etc. Right? So your feelings, your hard feelings about your partner, they're coming from your own set of unconscious or semi-unconscious rules, right? Your thoughts, your beliefs, your expectations about how a relationship should be. Now, this is never to say that your partner doesn't have room to grow and behave better and be more skillful in your relationship? Of course, that's probably always true. But because we can't get in his skin and make him grow or be more skillful by snapping our fingers, we've got to take a step back and do what we can do on our side of the street. And that is one of those things, is taking a good look at our rules, our rule book. So let's take a little while and talk about, where do these beliefs, where do these rules come from? Why do we even have a rule book to begin with? Right? Well, we grew up being fed ideas and rules about how relationships should be, right? How an awesome partner should be, what they should do, how they should behave, how they should not behave, right? We've also been fed these ideas and rules for how we should be, right? Like I said earlier. But we're really going to today be focusing on these rules and ideas that we have about how a relationship should be, and specifically how a good partner should be. So because these ideas were being fed to us from our family, from our culture, we unconsciously adopted them, right? And they really are from other people's ideas about life and relationships. And I always think that this is kind of funny, but like some of these ideas that we've internalized and started to see as how things should be, these ideas come from dead white men who lived hundreds of years ago, or from our great-great-grandmothers who lived in an entirely different era. Some of these ideas have come from Hollywood, right? From fairy tales, from tabloid magazines, even diamond companies, yes, who painted vivid pictures of how quote-unquote romantic relationships should be in order to sell more diamonds. In other words, some of your ideas about how your partner should treat you and be with you come from capitalistic people who are only interested in selling more of their product. They are not actually interested in the reality of what a good relationship looks like, or you actually genuinely being happy. So I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, are these the people, like your great-great-grandmother, right? Or these diamond companies, for example, are these the people you want running your marriage? Not me. I want to be in charge of how I feel in my marriage. What about you? So anyway, over time, these kind of ideas that we've kind of drunk in, we've imbibed, they kind of crystallize into a completely unconscious set of rules about how we should behave, how our partner should behave, right? And we expect our partner to follow these rules. Or, again, our relationship rulebook. Now, another name for this rulebook could be my super secret partner's operation manual, which I will tell him nothing about. Right? Because these rules can be so unconscious to us, and we could think this is just how people are supposed to behave. So we don't even share that we're hoping for this or that from our partner. We just get upset when they're not behaving that way. And the thing is, your partner doesn't necessarily have the same rule book. They weren't necessarily raised with the exact same set of ideas of how a partner is supposed to be, right? So they're going to be following their way, what they believe is the right way to be. But your way might be totally different. Another place that these rule books can actually get perpetuated or built in deeper is some therapy and some relationship advice, right? There are approaches to relationships that have you go about telling your partner what you quote unquote need, like a list of your requirements. In other words, your rules that you expect your partner to follow, right? So it can be perpetuated there as well, this relationship rule book. So relationship rule books are not in and of themselves bad, right? Like when our partner follows our rules, all is well, right? But like I just said, his rule book is probably different from yours in some or many ways, right? His ideas of what's reasonable and appropriate in a relationship, I guarantee you, is at times not going to align with yours. And the fact that he doesn't always follow your rule book isn't wrong, right? It's really only natural that we're going to have different ways, different rule books, different abilities, different inclinations than our partner does, right? So the problem with rule books isn't so much that our partner doesn't always follow our rules. It's that we have them. So why is it a problem? Let me go into a little bit more depth here before I share how to solve this and actually have a much better relationship. So there are many reasons it's problematic to have an unconscious rule book and not know how to work with it. The biggest one is that your ideas, your rules, so long as your partner isn't perfect at following them naturally, your rules will keep you from loving the real person who your partner is. And even the human that you are yourself when you have rules for yourself. These rules are ultimately going to prevent you from enjoying and improving the real marriage you actually have. Because, like I said, when you have these rules, you're going to have a lot of hard feelings. Again, when you have these rules and your partner isn't following them, or you yourself aren't living up to them, that happens too. Right? You're going to be feeling upset. You're going to feel frustration. You're going to feel disappointment. You're going to feel resentment, right? All of this grows when we expect our partner to follow our rules and they don't. And what's fascinating is as long as we have these rules and we have not acknowledged or examined or questioned them, our brain is continuously going to be gauging whether or not our partner is following those rules or violating those rules. And when your partner does not follow them, when he goes by his own rule book, you're likely unconsciously going to make it mean that he doesn't love you, he doesn't care for you, he doesn't respect you, or that he's bad at relationships, or that he's wrong and flawed in some way, or even that your love is doomed, or any number of other painful things. And when this is going on, things are going to just get harder between you. There will be conflict. There will be complaint coming from you. There'll be all the backfiring tactics that I've been talking about. There'll be control. There'll be all the fallout and struggle and disconnection that comes from all that. I want to give you a super little, sort of semi-insignificant example that I actually talked about once before on the podcast, just to illustrate this a little bit for you. So I had a client who enjoyed watching a television show in the evenings, and her husband sometimes would kind of walk in front of the TV while she was watching, or he'd come and kind of linger in the doorway of the living room. Now, unconsciously, she had a rule that was something like he should be leaving me alone when I'm watching my show, or like, this is my time and he should know it, right? And so what happened in her is she got irritated, frustrated with him, and then she'd either get kind of snarky with him or kind of withdraw and get a little cold to him. So this is completely classic. When we have a rule and our person isn't following it, we feel upset emotions of one form or another, and then we're very likely to withdraw or close off from him or try to change how our partner's doing things in one way or another, right? Usually with the backfiring techniques like getting defensive, making snide remarks, criticizing, complaining, right? Calling him names, even if it's just inside our head, right? I'm not saying most of you are yelling at your partner and calling him names, but like we can think negative thoughts about him. We might start arguing. We might, walk away, all sorts of things. And this is usually done in an attempt unconscious, however unconscious or conscious, to get your partner to follow your rules so that you can feel loved or respected or cared for and good in this relationship. And we can do these things in subtle ways, and they might not be hugely obvious to your partner, but if you have a rule and your partner isn't following it, almost guaranteed there's going to be a trace of some of these feelings and some of these behaviors if you really take an honest look. And all of this just leads to a downward cycle. You really end up getting emotionally and sort of behaviorally hijacked or kind of jerked around. In other words, your sense of this being a good relationship becomes out of your hands. Like it's putting a ton of power in your partner's behavior, right? You're giving his behavior, his lack of following your rules, a ton of power and making yourself pretty powerless over your happiness, over your capacity to be connected with your honey. It's not an empowering place to be. And I think this is really important to notice that this isn't because of your partner not following your rules. It's because you have the rules in the first place, right? So ironically, your relationship rulebook has complete control over how you are feeling and behaving, right? If he doesn't honor your rulebook, then you feel bad. So really, it comes down to you hurting yourself by having these rules. And having these rules and behaving in these ways generally doesn't wake your partner up to following your rules. It might even lead to the opposite, right? Oftentimes, as I talk about a lot, when we show up in these ways, right? When we get irritable, when we get controlling, when we start blaming, any of the backfiring tactics, oftentimes our partner kind of rebels against it or shuts down, feeling like they can't do anything right, feeling unaccepted and judged, right? Feeling helpless, sometimes feeling really confused about what is even happening. Or, if your experience isn't quite so tumultuous as I just made that sound, you or both of you might simply feel that your relationship is kind of sucked dry of real, genuine connection and love, right? This can be a consequence of having these relationship rules, right? Because it just kind of becomes two people just trying to live up to the other person's or the whole culture's ideas about how they should be, right? Like it can be just your partner trying to follow your rules, which feels like duty and obligation. It feels like a job with no room for them to be who they really are. And there's just no connection and no juiciness in that. So have I sold you yet on why relationship rule books aren't so useful in our relationships if what we're wanting is love and connection and supportiveness and all the good stuff? I want to now give you a few examples from my own old relationship rulebook. And it is what I call semi-dismantled. I still am continuing to do this work. I actually think that this work is lifelong work, but I've done a lot of letting go and of my rules, and things are so much better between my husband and I now that I have become aware of my rules and let go of my rigidity with them, as well as dissolved plenty of them. So here are some of them. This is kind of fun to listen to. Oh, and make sure to take note if any of these ring a bell for you. If you're like, ooh, I think that's one of my rules too. He may not interrupt me when I'm speaking. He needs to always speak in a kind tone of voice to me. He needs to respect that I sometimes get upset and never get upset in return. He shouldn't defend or explain himself when I'm trying to make a point about something he did wrong. He should love me with complete understanding and compassion. He needs to initiate lovemaking most of the time. He should not waste time on stupid stuff like browsing the internet when there are other way more important things to do. He should like to bring up deep topics, specifically about our relationship. And he should like talking about them as much as I do. He should not ever get drowsy when I'm sharing from my heart. So every time I look at these old rules, I giggle because it's pretty funny to see them and to say them out loud. They're kind of ridiculous and even hypocritical when I'm looking at them, right? But these expectations really used to totally dictate my feelings and reactions when my husband didn't live up to them. And they really prevented me from letting myself feel love for him. Laughing at them now is good medicine to help continue to melt their grip over me. So I want to take a moment and talk about that last rule. He should not ever get drowsy when I'm sharing from my heart. If you've been around my neck of the woods for a while, you may have heard me tell stories about that one before. My ex-husband actually fell asleep, sometimes fairly frequently, when I was sharing important things from my heart, when we were having like relationship talks. And it used to drive me crazy. It made me so upset. But it actually wasn't that he was falling asleep that made me upset. It was my rule. Having that rule and watching him totally disobey it led me to feeling so angry and hurt. Because what's really interesting here is oftentimes when our partner doesn't follow our rules, we take it to mean that they don't love us, that they don't care about us enough. It's interesting to notice that without the rule, I would have felt compassion and even had a good laugh with him that he's so tired that he's falling asleep while I'm talking about important things, right? And without the rule, I would have figured out how to talk about important things when he wasn't so tired, right? Instead, I just used to get mad and sad, right? And I'd really miss out on opportunities for connection. I think this is a really great example of why having a relationship rulebook can lead to so much pain and disconnection. But again, they're so common. And this is why our relationship rulebooks are such culprits of struggle and suffering and unnecessary pain and disconnection in our relationships. So many of our rules, like I said earlier, we've unconsciously adopted from our culture. And so I want to share a little list. It's way more extensive than this, but I want to share a list of some of the cultural rules, common cultural ideas and rules that we pick up that are actually pretty toxic. So as you listen, you might also note down the ones that you think you might subscribe to that might also be rules for you. He, my partner, needs to meet my needs and his needs. I need to meet his needs. He should show me he values me and us by doing things the way I best feel valued. This may sound more like this to you. He should speak my love language. Marriage is supposed to be 50-50, or love is an equal give and take. He should interact with me with complete understanding and compassion. People who love other people should always speak with a kind tone of voice. Here's a biggie. If he loves me, he will do what I want. Now, I want you to notice that that's sort of a generalized statement. It's going to be more subtle. It's going to show up in different ways. For some of you, it might be like, if he loves me, he'll come to bed with me on time, the same time I do. If he loves me, he'll be more affectionate with me like I've asked him to be. But really underneath that, the overarching rule is if he loves me, he will do what I want. Okay. Another one, to be a good lover, he should automatically know what I like and want in the bedroom. He should remember special dates and acknowledge them, like birthdays, right? By planning things. He should listen to me attentively when I'm talking. He should compliment me frequently. He should never look at other women. He should text me every day. He should dress more stylishly. He should know what I want without me asking. So many of us as women fall prey to that one. Here's another couple. He should want to improve. And a relationship should be fun or enjoyable all the time. So I threw that last one in there. That's a little less about our partner. Right in this podcast, I'm more focusing on the rules we have for our partner and not just the rules we have for relationships in general. But that last one is more about like how a good relationship should be. And I think it's important to notice those ones in ourselves too, because we oftentimes end up comparing our relationship to this idea of how one should be, and that can be really painful. So with this list of common cultural rules that we have around relationships, I just want you to try imagining your partner trying to constantly be perfect at following all of these rules. And of course, this is just a smidgen. Like you probably have a bunch more rules, right? So can you imagine how that puts a lot of pressure on your partner or leads to taking action out of duty instead of who he naturally is or even what he really wants to do? Right? And that's a complaint I hear a lot. Like, right, when he's just doing what you ask him to do, it doesn't really feel as loving as you hope, right? Like if he's telling you he thinks you look beautiful because you insisted he does so more often, it maybe won't feel so genuine and you won't really trust it. Yeah? So if you're hearing these lists of rules and you're like recognizing that you might have many of them or just a few, and you're feeling a little bashful or not so great about yourself because of it, what I want you to know is it actually comes from a good place. The reason you have these rules and you want your partner to follow them is because of how you think it will make you feel if he does. In other words, having these rules is unconsciously a way of taking care of yourself, of trying to support yourself and feeling well and feeling good. It's just not a very effective way. As I've showed, hopefully, it's actually a very painful and disconnecting way. And luckily, you can do something about it. Just because you have these rules, we all do, doesn't mean you're stuck with them for life. So here's some good news I want to remind you of again now. It is your thinking and your perception, your way of internalizing things that creates your feelings, not your partner's actions. And you have total power over what you think and believe and how you perceive. In other words, you actually have control over what your rules are and if you want to keep any or if you want to get rid of all of them. You can learn how to get in charge of your thinking, your beliefs, your rules. You can learn how to question and release the rules that are hurting you. And as you do, you'll get to love the actual person your partner is, not just some fantasy who will inevitably always be falling short and disappointing you. Because without the rule, without the vision of how he should be, you are free to be with, to love, and to grow, to love deeper what is actually real, the human you have chosen as your partner. Do you remember my rule about my husband not getting drowsy? Nowadays, my second husband, my current husband, also gets drowsy at times when we're talking about important things and about our relationship. And now I actually see it as a sign it's just not an ideal time to talk. And it doesn't upset me. In fact, it happened last night and I laughed because I dropped the rule. I no longer have the rule that he shouldn't get drowsy when I'm sharing important things, right? And this avoids so much totally unnecessary upset. I can just love him with his sleepiness and find another time to talk. And it feels so much better and works so much better. Things are so much more harmonious. So, how then do you let go of the rules that aren't serving you? In the most basic sense, and of course I work with clients in a much more intricate and in-depth way, here are the 4 primary things you need to be able to do. 1, reveal your rulebook to yourself. 2, Examine and notice what your rules are creating in your specific relationship. 3, gently question your rules or debunk them, or at least poke holes in them. And 4, rewrite your rulebook to be only about you. So let's do just a brief overview of each of these steps. This is an excellent place to have a piece of paper and a pen. All right, so step 1, reveal your rulebook to yourself. Really, this is about discovering what your rules are, because they're there, I promise. So to do so, ask yourself, what am I believing about how relationships should be? Or how should a good partner behave? So write a list of these specific answers, right? The specific things your partner should do and should not do in your life together. What should he do differently than he does now? I want you to get detailed. Like if you really want to go deep with this, get detailed. Add lots of them. You can, of course, add any rules from the lists I've read to you, like my own rule book, and common and cultural rules that I shared. So make that initial list now, and then also as you go about your life this week, keep an eye out for other ones that might pop up. I have found that I'm still stumbling across ones that I hadn't noticed before. You can also do the same process on rules that you have for yourself. I'm not focusing on this in this podcast, although it's a hugely important part of this work, because we oftentimes have ideals or rules for ourselves that we don't live up to, and that can be really painful and create all sorts of issues in ourselves and our relationship. So feel free to make a list of your own rules that you have for yourself as well. Now, I want you to know that sometimes just seeing these rules can be enough to make you go, oh, wow, that's silly. I don't actually believe that at all, right? And then the rule kind of just drops itself. So it may be enough for some of you, or at least with some of your rules, to just see them. Be like, oh, yep, I actually don't want to live by that. I don't want to act that out, and I don't believe it, right? But if that hasn't happened yet, which is also common, I want you to take this next step, which is number 2, really notice if it's working to keep these rules, right? Examine and notice what they create in your specific relationship. So this really just means taking stock of what happens when you have this rule and your partner doesn't follow it. You can ask yourself, how do I feel? How do I act or behave when that happens? And lastly, does that get me what I want when I act or behave that way? It can be best to think of a specific time or a specific example where your partner didn't follow one of your rules, what you felt like when that happened, how you acted with him, and if that created more of what you want ultimately, which, by the way, is usually closeness, connection, feeling like a team, right? Feeling in love, feeling loved. And now your hint here is that it almost always doesn't get you what you want. So once you see that, it doesn't usually lead to a good experience. That can help loosen that rule's grip on you, or help the rule soften or fade away. But it's not always the case that it just dissolves when we see how it's not working. So in that case, we go to step 3, which is to gently question your rules or debunk them, or at least start poking holes in them. So there are many ways to do this that will really make them less powerful and less problematic. There's a lot more than I can get into here in this podcast, but again, I teach this in much more depth in my program, Treasured. So if you know that this is a challenge in your relationships, certainly come join me in the next round of Treasured. But here are a few questions to start with. Question A. Is it true that he should do things this way just because it makes it easier for me? Like, if I ask myself that question about he shouldn't fall asleep, or he shouldn't get drowsy when I'm talking about important things, of course it's not true. If he's tired, shouldn't he be falling asleep? If he's exhausted, right? All right, question B. Is your rule true in the most ultimate sense? Like, is it fact? Is it universal law? Or is it just an idea that humans made up? A collective story that some people would agree upon and others wouldn't. And by the way, as I go through this list, choose one rule and question them with all of these questions and just see what you come up with. It's really interesting. All right, question C. Do you really want your partner to behave this way, even if they don't want to? Even if it doesn't feel right to them? Or if they have a valid reason for not behaving this way? Question D. Have you ever not followed this rule perfectly yourself? I love this one. Sometimes we have these rules for other people and we don't even recognize that we actually aren't living by them ourselves, right? Like there actually have been times I've gotten really sleepy when I've been having an important conversation with my partner, right? The human brain can be really hypocritical, and that's not bad. It's just interesting to take a look at that, right? Like the follow-up question could be, do I want to hold my partner to standards that I don't even hold myself to? Question E. Why do I want my partner to behave this way? And I'm going to give you a hint that might help you with your answer. It's most likely, almost always, because of how you think you will feel based on their behavior, right? Like notice how it comes down to that's what you're really wanting, a feeling, or to avoid a feeling. Like in the example I gave you of a former client, one of the feelings she was probably wanting in that moment was like just peace. So make sure you identify what you're hoping to feel or not feel by your partner following your rule. Make sure you write down your answers. Question F. When someone tries to get you to behave in a certain way to make them feel good, what is that like for you? Does that feel good? Does that feel like love or respect? Question G. Since the reason you want him to follow your rule is because it makes it easier for you to feel a certain way, I want you to notice how dependent on him following your rule this makes you. This makes your happiness, right? Which really means you're depending on something that's totally uncontrollable and out of your hands in order to feel good. This is a very powerless place to be, right? It's really relinquishing your own power to love and feel loved and your own agency over your behavior by having these rules. So the question is that what you want? Question H. How might it be true that he should do the opposite of your rule? So, for example, if your rule is he should text me every day, how is it true that he should not text you every day? Maybe it's because he should be focusing on where he is. He should be present with the people he's with. Or if your rule is he should dress more stylishly, maybe you swap it over to he should dress in a way that he likes because that feels good to him, right? Or if your rule is he should know what I want without me asking, you can swap it over to he should not be a mind reader, given that most humans do not have that magical skill, right? Or my rule, my example, he should not get drowsy when I'm sharing important things. He should get drowsy after a long day supporting us at work. Yeah? So those are the questions to start questioning and poking holes in your rule book. And you can go through those questions for any of the more stubborn ones, the more stubborn rules. All right, so probably by now your brain is questioning if these rules are working for you, if your rule book is worth hanging on to, and even if there's any real truth to your rules at all. So that's good. And this can really be a process to get free of them. So I want you to just keep this up, keep using these questions, and notice when your rules do come up, and go through these questions again. Eventually, that rule might pop up, and you instantly notice that it's popped up, and you let it go because you know it isn't truth and it isn't helpful in your ultimate goal of having a loving relationship and of your own emotional well-being. Which brings me to the last step, which again, step 4 is to rewrite your rule book to be only about you. or just make your rules only about yourself. Since it's really all you can enforce, there are some rules you can decide you want to follow yourself. Just please don't use these to be mean to yourself if you don't follow them perfectly, right? Have patience and be kind as you learn to follow them. And if you're imperfect at it, have compassion for yourself. These rules are really only going to be about you because you're the only one you can control. But truly, that's everything in an intimate relationship. So these are great for turning towards when you notice your partner not following your old rules or for any time. So here are some of my favorite rules that you can adopt if you'd like. They're just for me. They're just more like guidelines. They're more like guidelines than hard and fast rules. But my job is to love my partner exactly the way he is. Quirky, weird humanness and all. My job is to clear all the obstacles in me to loving him and to find my way to peace and love when he can't or doesn't want to do what I want. My job is to make it clear what I want, and if he can't meet those wants right now, to make sure I meet my own emotional needs and work towards what I want. Those are some pretty powerful ones. And if you adopt those and let go of your relationship rules for your partner, you're going to see some magic happen in your relationship. So of course, feel free to adopt my rules there or come up with your own. If you want to come up with your own, here's a good question to start with. Who do I want to be in my relationship? And what values do I want to live by? All right. So let's remember, it is not wrong or bad to have rules for your partner. It just comes with an emotional and relational cost. And it may be that once you see and you question your rules, you actually decide you want to keep a few, even if it causes issues. And that is fine, as long as it's not too many, and as long as you're clear and cool with the trade-off. Like for me, for example, I still actually have a rule: you may not lie to me. Granted, I cannot control if my husband does lie to me. And there actually have been times when he tried to benevolently twist the truth, and I found out, and I've gotten really angry, and it caused real conflict. And I will take that in order to not have truth twisting, tongue twister, be a part of our marriage. And as I say that, I want to acknowledge that my anger does not actually have the power to stop that or to control him. So I'm also willing to accept he's not perfect this way yet, and to keep communicating about it and supporting him in growing in that area. But you can probably see how if I had a bunch more rules and tried to enforce them, how that would cause all sorts of mayhem and unhappiness. And so many of my clients come to me with a pretty big list of unconscious and unspoken rules, or sometimes spoken. But no wonder they're so unhappy when they first come to me, right? You'd have to be a perfect human to follow all of them really well. And hardly a soul stands a chance against all those rules. Now, here's a really important point I don't want to wrap up without saying. I'm never saying, as always, just take what you get or don't ask for what you want. I'm never saying that. And obviously, we want to have some standards that we won't tolerate. But those aren't rules as much as places for boundaries, such as physical or emotional abuse, yelling, right? You can even set a boundary for if your partner stares at his phone when you're having an important conversation. Now remember, a boundary is about what you will do when he does that. It's not about making him stop or even getting mad at him, right, for doing it. That's actually reverting to having a rule. So again, boundaries are a little bit more like rules or guidelines for yourself. For example, I will stop speaking when he starts scrolling his phone in a conversation. And I can't rightly teach the Relationship Rulebook without referring you to the Boundary Basics episode of this podcast, which is number 51. So definitely refer to that. And of course, ask for what you want. If you want your partner to do something, instead of having an unconscious rule, an expectation, you can always make a conscious request of him. Making a request is a great thing. I highly advise. But just don't expect your partner to say yes, because that is holding him to a rule, and nobody's going to win when you do. So, taking a good look at your rules, your relationship rulebook, and questioning and releasing their grip on you is part of developing the skills to handle your own thoughts and emotions and ways of showing up. So, in other words, everything that's on your side of the street, your role in whether your relationship is wonderful or not wonderful. And as you soften and loosen the grip of these previously programmed unconscious relationship rules, you naturally start to let your partner be more of who they really are. And you'll naturally feel less negative emotion, and there will be so much less conflict, and you'll ultimately get to just enjoy and love on the person that your partner is so much more, which just feels the best. And you're also going to have so much more power of influence, so much more skillfulness to be able to communicate so much more effectively, and ultimately to create that culture of love and safety and connection that all of these old rules were trying and completely failing at getting you. So have a little fun with this process. And if this is making some sense to you, but you feel like you have a ways to go to get this really like in your bones and let your relationship rules go and to ultimately create the culture of love you really want, you're going to want to join me in the next round of my marriage coaching program, Treasured. Hop on the wait list now to get the first chance to enroll when it opens in the fall, and to get exclusive access to the early enrollment discount, which you're only going to be able to get if you're on the wait list. So head to the link in the show notes to do that, or head to www.lifeisworthloving.com/treasured, and you'll see a button on that page that says add me to the wait list. So get to it and be oh so well.